you make your own luck. And I have been pretty lucky, but I've also had some pretty painful things, like we were growing so fast at the early stages. At one point I actually ran out of money. And I ran out of money, not necessarily because I was reckless, but because some clients sort of didn't meet their payment deadlines, which I'd been planning. And I was this close. I had hair falling out of my hair. I had alopecia. So I had big clunks of hair that had fallen out. It was very embarrassing, like walking around with all these bald spots. And
Hello and welcome to Expedition Business, where we explore the highs and lows of everyday entrepreneurs in their business adventures. My accomplice for today is Johan Venter, and our guest for today is Jason English, who is not your typical person when you think of a wisdom from a fireplace experience. But Jason English is no typical person and definitely no typical entrepreneur. He is part of the very prestigious Young Presidents Organization. He is Chief Ecosystems Officer of CG Tech, CEO of Al Laith Group in Dubai. He also holds directorships in companies like Virtulab as well as Prommac. But what impressed me the most about Jason is that he started his career as a paramedic in the police force. But before I give everything away, I think it's time to catch up with Jason English at the Merchant Hotel just outside Vanderbijl Park so that he can tell his story. I had you on my phone saved for many years as Jason English Lake Umuzi event organizer. That's what I thought you did. I was slightly misinformed.
yeah, so it's kind of interesting. I mean, when I one of the things that I guess has always come naturally to me is trying to give back to society and people. And I think back in that day where you would know me from Lake Umuzi events was Johan and I had looked at, I really wanted to bring an event to Secunda, which was a relatively quiet town at the time. And, we were very active in that community, and I just felt like it was lacking something mega. And so I had a friend of mine who was the world jet ski champion. I was very plugged into that circuit. And I thought, well, why don't we bring the world championships to Secunda? We've got the contacts, could know a lot of people, we could probably raise some money, and I'm sure we'll be able to pull it off. And yeah, I went to Johan and said to Johan, hey, let's start an events company and let's bring this world jet skiing champion here. And it was a non-profit. I mean, so it was just really to do something for the community. And so then I think you got involved with some publicity at that stage, and that's how we first met. So,
yeah, a very long time ago. But before that, as per your LinkedIn profile, you started off as a paramedic in the police?
Yeah, so actually I started off as a paramedic first, and then sort of moved into the police. But yeah, I mean, I'd actually wanted to be a doctor when I grew up. Unfortunately, I did what most kids do and didn't pay too much attention in school, and so I didn't get that grade, and I failed med school, so I didn't get in. And so the second best thing I could do was to become a paramedic, and in that journey of being a paramedic, I worked very closely with a lot of the police. And so there was an opportunity that came up where they started a collision unit where we would be first responders to accident scenes. And so of course that was I always played cops and robbers as a kid, and I thought, well, now I can play cops and robbers and be a paramedic at the same time. So basically moved into that collision unit and became a first responder. So by default was a paramedic in the accident unit of the police. And then the police sort of transitioned, then I got very excited into the dogs, and so we became part of the canine unit, and Then I went into the anti-hijacking unit, where it was, every level you get a little bit braver, and you kind of want to push the boundaries of the things that you do. And so I then ended up in the anti-hijacking unit, and I think in 1999 when I got shot was the moment that everyone sort of said to me, right, enough cops and robbers, and now time to actually have a bit of a serious job. So.
And I'm sure you, looking back, you don't mind making the transition.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, listen, there's a whole bunch of lessons that I learned from being in the police, actually. The one was, there were some major lessons that I learned, actually. The one was the importance of systems and processes. Whenever you go through the door, you always had this protocol, one would go left, one would go right, one would go center. If you all kind of went into a building and all went right and the guys were sitting on the left, they're going to shoot you in the back, So I learned a lot about that, about, how to respond when gunfire starts, how to respond in different hostile situations, and the importance of systems. And that carried through actually into business, where I'm such a pedantic stickler of, I want to know, I want a system, I want a one-page process for everything. And if the process is too long to remember, then, it's a waste of time. So it needs to be very simple and straightforward. And of course, the other thing that you learn about in the police force is completely trust, right? Trust and teamwork. Because if you don't trust your partner and what they're going to do, well, then you're going to end up in a body bag. So I think, carrying those lessons through into the business environment has also been super helpful, actually. So yeah, I always say to people, don't think that and even being a paramedic, there was a lot of lessons from that, but just the importance of teamwork and trust and having a systematic approach to things is the difference between success and failure. I was sort of a bit of a hooligan at school, to be quite honest, and I didn't really have clear direction in terms of what I wanted to do. And actually at the school for post-matric, they only offered 3 subjects, and it was mechanical, electrical and electronic engineering. And so I never wanted to stick my fingers in plugs because I knew it would shock me. I had no interest in electronics, and so by default I went into mechanical engineering. And that sort of spearheaded my career, where after post-matric I continued studying mechanical engineering while I was working in the police. So I actually used to study during the day, work in the police at night. So it was kind of a 24-hour job, I guess.
Kind of that Batman life.
Yeah.
Bruce Wayne at day and Batman at night.
Yeah, exactly. So sort of two hats and for different scenarios.
Wow. And today you've got 2 MBAs.
No, so I did the first MBA with Leicester University in the UK. It didn't go down as well as I would have liked it to have gone down. And then I think about halfway through, I was trying to do that a bit remotely, which was really a challenge. And then I defaulted. I decided actually I need to do a permanent, I need to be an in-person MBA. I wasn't disciplined enough just to do things virtually. And so I went full-time to study my master's. And I mean, that was also a really interesting time, right? I used to travel, so I'd finish work 6 p.m. I'd get in my car, actually at 5 p.m. I'd get in my car in Secunda, I'd drive to Johannesburg for an hour and a little bit.
Wow.
Go study from 6 to 10 p.m. in person every night, 4 days a week. 4 days a week, every week. And that was for 2 years. And there was a lot of actually lessons that came from that too, because when I used to drive back, a very good friend of ours, or a friend of mine, Jose Maciel, who many people will know from that area, he was busy building his new Sky Hill facility. And so every night at 11 p.m. when I was driving back home, I would see him outside his workshop. And so I'd sort of pull in there and we'd just have general chats. And I was always like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Why are you building such a big thing? And I guess I learned a lot of lessons actually from Jose back in those days. So it was really interesting to see how, all these different pieces of your life come together, but they actually shape who you become. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you almost went to work for Jose at some point.
yeah, it was close. I didn't end up there. And I guess in hindsight it was good that we didn't. So sorry, Jose, if you do ever watch this. But yeah, I didn't end up going there. And I ended up going on my own, which ultimately was probably the best decision that I ever made. But yeah, I mean, I have a lot of respect for our competitors, and Jose being one of them. And I think he's an amazing man, an amazing leader, and there was a lot of lessons that I learned.
So you tried the MBA twice, and do you feel it added value to your life, or like many people that all today would say, in many circumstances, the MBA is slightly outdated and a bit more of a relic of the past?
No, so I mean, for me personally, like my experience with an MBA was unbelievable. I think that, you know, when you get into a room and you have a number of different personalities that are talking about different topics that you may have your own bias towards. So for example, you know, employee incentives, you know, I had my own beliefs about employee incentives. And I remember it was the guys from Roman's Pizza were also doing the MBA with me. And I remember them saying how they had tried the incentive plan that I had adopted and it failed completely. And I remember sitting there going, wow, I never thought about it from that angle, right? I always just thought about it from my perspective and the type of business that I have, but I can see how that wouldn't work in their type of business. So I think what we ended up, you know, and those lessons just happened over and over and over and over again. So for me, the value of the MBA is really, it's fast tracking getting multiple people's experience and being able to share that experience with each other about different topics, whether it's, you know, the way you manage people, whether it's operational, whether it's marketing, whether it's, you know, business development or sales, or it doesn't really matter what it is. Everybody's got their own perspectives and each company's got its own perspective. And yeah, sharing those in a room is powerful.
So don't fall into the camp of Elon Musk saying there are too many MBAs ruining great companies and not enough engineers.
Well, luckily I'm an engineer with an MBA, so maybe he's true. I mean, maybe his point is true. But that was another lesson that I learned, right? Like when you follow your passion and you do things for the reasons that really are important to you, you can yield good results. But if you're just doing things for the sake of doing things or because somebody else has told you to do something, actually, you don't really get the success that you're expecting.
And I've also heard that people say that when you're an entrepreneur, you should just follow your passion and you don't need a degree to do that. What's your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, look, you know, everything with a little, you got to bring perspective to statements like that. I mean, the reality is, you know, if my passion is, you know, I don't know, if my passion is collecting wood from the trees around a river, you know, the reality is what kind of business is there for that, right? So you've got to take these things with a pinch of salt. I think where people go wrong is they say, what is the trend that's happening? And I know nothing about that trend, or I have no passion for that trend, but I'm going to go and I'm going to pursue it because it's the hot thing. And, you know, metaverse, for example, is one now. I hear people talking about the metaverse all the time. I'm passionate about the metaverse, but there's a lot that aren't, and they just, I want to be involved in the metaverse. And when you talk to them, they have absolutely no idea. But at the same time, if you're going to go into a business where you don't have that passion, it's very hard for you to sell a story. Like I truly believe that the way that you make money as an entrepreneur is you can tell a story about your product, your service, or whatever. And it's that storytelling which is so powerful. So if you're passionate about a topic, you can talk about it for hours. If you're not, you're just, what did I read last week, or what did I prep in this meeting? And then you forget half of it, right? It's like public speaking. If you go up and stand and try and public speak with a whole bunch of notes, you forget half your stuff. But if you if it's really true to what you believe in, you can talk about a topic for days.
You mentioned previously you are a member of YPO, like the Young Presidents Organization. When did that start?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting because it starts before I joined YPO. So you'll remember, I think you might have even covered the story, but I was involved in the Sleep Out for Good on the streets of Johannesburg, which is essentially the coldest night of the year. Everyone got together on one of Johannesburg's bridges and we slept on the street in an effort to raise funds for the homeless. And it was an initiative of Nelson Mandela. And, you know, sort of we all climbed in and supported that. And it was at that event I actually met 3 incredible characters. And they sort of said to me, hey, Jason, you know, have you heard of YPO? And I was like, no, I never heard of YPO. They were like, you need to join. So I was like, okay, sounds interesting again. You know, coming back to conversation we had offline is, you know, do we take these opportunities or do we just shut them all down? And I'm opportunistic, so I was like, okay, I don't know what it is, but I'll try it. And so I registered and subscribed, and I got accepted and joined YPO. And I mean, that ultimately became...
Sorry, can I just quickly interrupt there? Got accepted is not as easy as that. It's quite a long process.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's criteria. So, you have to be... back then it was slightly different. I think the criteria today is like $15 million of revenue as a business, 50 employees. And other than that, if you tick those boxes, you're pretty much there. But once I was in, it opened up my eyes to a whole new level of experience. I mean, the mantra line of YPO is lifelong learning. And so for me, going back to the MBA day, this was all about me becoming better through just learning about things in general. And so when I joined YPO, I started learning so much more than I ever could have imagined, because instead of being surrounded by a bunch of friends that you go to the pub with and drink and, have a party with, I was being surrounded by executives of, Coca-Cola, ATC Towers, big packaging businesses, Pick and Pay, and that was on a local level, Vodacom. When you start going internationally, all of a sudden you're in the mix with, Google, Tesla, Facebook, Salesforce, Ripple, XRP, like all these, all the latest and everything that's going on, they're all YPO members. So it was really important for me when I started to be sitting around this level of person, that I was learning so many new stories and learning so much about, technology, and sort of that drove my technology path, just because I could see how it could add a lot of value to life. So.
Talking about technology, your new startup,
Virtulab or VirtuWorks. It's confusing, I understand.
I remember Virtue.
Yeah. So actually it's a funny story. So that started out as CG Labs because we were CG Tech. Actually, before CG Tech, we were CG Holdings. It's amazing how in business things just don't work out the way that you plan. So we had CG Holdings. We thought we'd be a public company one day, and so CG Holdings would be a good name. And then we realized that, going public was not a great idea. And so we then rebranded to CG Tech because we thought it was more sexy. And in the process, we had the startup that we were sort of building software with. And so we then called it CG Labs. And after CG Labs, we said, well, I think we're confusing people because CG Tech and CG Labs are very close. They think it's the same business, but it's not. So we changed it to the Virtulab. And then with the Virtulab, they were building essentially two things, doing sort of consultancy and building software predominantly in the virtual space. So virtual reality, augmented reality, holographic imagery, now metaverse technology. And then we stumbled across a platform that we built, which was called the VirtuWorks. We called it the VirtuWorks. So now we've created even more confusion because people get confused between the Virtulab and VirtuWorks, which is actually just a product.
Something that interests me is when I open up LinkedIn, you are always at the top. There's always something happening. How do you get time for your family?
Sure. So, I mean, look, the reality is that it's like it's a hard balance, right? I sort of have this triangle that I live in. So it's sort of wealth, freedom, and meaning. And if you look at those three, I think if you're not balanced within those three, like you'll never be fulfilled as an individual. So, you can have all the money in the world, for example, but if you've got no freedom to enjoy your money and you've got no meaning in life, you're going to be lonely and you're going to hate all the money that you have. Likewise, you can be the most charitable social worker in the world, right? And if you've got no money and you're still every weekend doing social work and you've got no freedom, you're still going to be miserable. Or you can be a person that has no job and you can have all the freedom in the world, but you've got no purpose in life and you've got no cash, you're going to be miserable. So it's how do you find the balance between those three? And I think coming back to, the social media and work and family and trying to find that balance, I think each one of us as individuals gets fulfilled differently. And that's good, because I think if we were all fulfilled the same way, this would be a really boring world that we'd live in, right? And we wouldn't innovate. Imagine if Elon Musk didn't do what he did. People think he's crazy. He is. but he's changing the world, right? And so if he wasn't the radical person, well, who is that radical person changing? So for me, I'm kind of set in my destination. You know, I understand that I'm making sacrifices for my family, or with my family, hopefully one day for my family, but actually it's for a greater good, I think. And so a lot of the sacrifices that I make are really for me personally to touch communities, and hence the reason why I changed from chief executive to chief ecosystem, right? But you know, I believe that we live in this ecosystem, and if we have the power to make a difference to that ecosystem, we should. And so, because if we don't, nobody else is going to. So, you know, we can contribute, we can do our little bit. And I think for me, you know, I sort of carve my day up into different segments, and I'm really bad at it, right? So don't think that I have all the answers. Like, I suck at this, right? And I get told all the time that I suck at it, but my peers will tell you that a lot. But I do try and have these segments where, you know, I allocate time for YPO, I allocate time for the different slots in the businesses. And what I find works for me is I just got to pencil in my diary these slots for me to do things. Because if it's in the diary, generally I'm more committed. If I just mentally allocate, like Monday I'm going to focus on this business, Tuesday it just goes out the window. So I have weekly calls with all of our companies. I then have weekly slots allocated to my wife, have weekly slots allocated to my kids. And of course, you know, when business comes and there's, you know, a high level environment, then the family gets trumped. And I try not to let the family events get trumped by business, but it does happen. So yeah, there's never a perfect balance, but it's just a choice that I've taken, and not to say that I would advise other people take that choice, but we do need different personalities in the world, and it's just, I'm prepared to make those sacrifices so that I can make a difference.
Oh, I'd like to say, if everybody had a perfectly balanced life, we all would be just average.
Exactly. And listen, we like, you know, why be average when you were born to stand out, right? So stand out.
Okay. So speaking of your family and your kids, if they want to go into an entrepreneurial field one day, what advice would you give them?
Sure. Don't follow in Dad's footsteps. Don't make the same mistakes. No, look, I mean, I think, you know, again, we have to bring perspective on these. I think there's different generations that get created in families. I think the reality is that, you know, I wasn't born into money. You know, my father started in the army, my mother was a secretary, you know, and they worked themselves up, and they were pretty, what I could call it, life corporateers. You know, my dad ultimately ended up in Toyota for many, many years. My mom ended up at a caravan place for like 40 years. And so they were very, what we call lifers in the job. But that was a stable enough footing for me to grow up with a reasonable education, and being able to, you know, get good education and just have a good start in life.
Yes.
So my kids, of course, are going to have it much different. They've got everything on their plate. You know, there's an old saying: the first generation learns how to manage money. The second generation learns how to create money, and the third generation learns how to destroy the money. And so for me personally, I think a lot of the values that I instill in my kids now is not even about entrepreneurship. It's just about the challenge of managing money. And so, you know, I try and force my kids to learn, different life lessons. You know, we have family mantras like be kind to each other. You know, other people don't have what you have. You have to respect that. People look different, people have different lifestyles, and I'm just trying to really educate them around that concept of the life that they live is not a normal life, and so they should be grateful for it. And then every now and again, you know, we try and take them out of that zone and bring them back, for example, to the bush, and take them back into Africa, and
Take them back to South Africa.
take them back to South Africa. No electricity. I mean, you know, like, these things are really stupid, but they're actually quite funny when you think about them. Like, my son comes here and he's like, "Dad, I can't play PlayStation, the Wi-Fi is too slow." You know, and I'm like, yeah, well, that's South Africa for you, boy. It's the rest of the world is not all the same as Dubai. So you have to think about these things differently. You know, for example, they have a nanny, and I force the nannies not to carry their bags, just because I know that otherwise they're going to grow up not understanding that that's not normal. You know, they have a driver that drives them around, and that's not normal. So you know, it's all these things that you got to kind of keep reminding them and trying to bring them up and understand. And I think part of the rationale for us choosing the school, for example, that we chose is that they run from the age of 6 a junior MBA program for these kids.
Wow.
And it's run by business leaders, and you know, it's all about money management. It's about the concept of idea generation, turning that into a business, marketing that business, and then being able to monetize that business. And so from a young age, they're already learning a lot about that. And so, you know, I see a lot of the values coming out in them. And probably one of the biggest lessons that, you know, my wife and I are focused on is that we don't want to raise our children so that we love them. We want to raise our children so that everybody else loves them. And if we've done
That's difficult.
And if we've done that, then I think, you know, we would have ticked a lot of those boxes. So.
I was about to say, Johan, you also had a nanny and a driver. The only problem
different
is
circumstances.
the driver you had was only when he had extra time between the deliveries for my company.
Not everybody is privileged enough to get picked up by a van at school. Fully branded. They know, oh, he travels in the yellow car. What a cool guy.
But you didn't have an MBA at school.
No, unfortunately not.
That's something we can bring to South Africa. Speaking of South Africa and Dubai and all the differences, how do you see the future of South Africa?
Look, I mean, I'm an optimist at heart, right? I think as South Africans, we're very much optimists at heart. So we all, you know, I can't think of a bad South Africa. It's just not within my capabilities. So, but you know, South Africa's got amazing things. You know, we've got beautiful cities, we've got great bush adventures, we've got amazing places like this on the river. You know, it's hard to find all of those in any other country around the world. So, you know, we've only got a few things that we need to get right. And you know, I think at the moment, you know, I ask this question a lot. Like when you run a business, you have a vision. Without a vision, your business is not aligned, the employees are not aligned, the shareholders are not aligned, and ultimately the business doesn't succeed. So what is the vision of your business? And then the bigger question is, what is the vision for South Africa from the presidency's office? And I guarantee you, if I had to ask any one of the ministers, what is the vision for South Africa, I don't think they'd be able to tell me. And if I had to ask any member of society, what's the vision for South Africa, I don't think anyone would be able to tell me. We'd say what we think it is. But I think it all starts with, if we can just, you know, Nelson Mandela, when he came out, he had a vision. He wanted to break down black and white and bring us together. And that was clear. And I think, you know, what the actions he represented at the stadium when he came out in, you know, Francois Pienaar's rugby jersey, the things that he drove, having the white bodyguards, and, you know, making sure that he was representing what he wanted the future to be. It got everyone behind him. I think that message has changed drastically over the years. And yeah, I mean, we hope that somebody's going to come along, a leader's going to come along with a clear vision. And you just look at, you know, I don't want to talk politics, but you look at what's happening with Ukraine and Russia. You know, nobody even knew about Ukraine. You know, and you know, people have their opinions, and that's all fine, and there's no right and wrong opinion. But you look at what Zelensky's done as a person, in terms of being out there, being on the front line. His vision is to, you know, keep his country intact, and you know, people are rallying behind that. The world's rallying behind it in a lot of cases. So I think we just need a leader that's going to come out and say, right, this is the vision for our country, and we're going to go, these are the strategies we're putting behind that vision, and we're going to achieve our success.
I think we can stand here and talk for the whole day.
In this beautiful setting, I'm sure we could.
It's a pity it's not summer. But yeah, Jason, thank you so much for the time today. It was an amazing experience chatting to you. So for everyone else, all the links will be in our descriptions. Any other information that we mentioned, all the people, all the companies, just check in the description below for all the links. And that's it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Cheers.
Cheers.
To the next one.